In this presentation, I'm going to give a brief introduction to the GCU Digital Collections, which is the library's online repository for our unique digital materials. For a quick overview, I'm first going to cover the development of the digital collections, including digitizing the materials and building the website, and I'll speak specifically about the GCU Historic Photos collection. I'm then going to share a few interesting examples of what that collection has to offer, and I'll end with a few thoughts on where I'd like to see the digital collections go over the next few years. I'll start with a question. Why have digital collections in the first place? What's the benefit? As it turns out, there are actually several benefits to having this sort of digital presence, and the first one is just that, having a digital presence. Our library has a lot of great things in the archives, but they're more or less invisible online. Having a digital collections website is a really effective way of showing people what we have. It's also a great way to facilitate access to the materials. Normally, you'd need to schedule an appointment and come into the library to see the archives, but that's not always practical or possible. And while this has really been underscored by the pandemic, it's always been the case for people doing research. Digital collections, then, are especially valuable because they offer free, immediate access to anyone, anywhere, at any time. This is a great benefit for researchers as well as more casual users. Digital collections are also valuable in that if something were to happen to the original files, we would still have digital copies. I do want to point out, though, that digital collections by themselves are not considered an adequate preservation strategy. There can be a few reasons for that, but the most relevant one for our collections is that we don't actually host the digital collections website, which means we could potentially lose access to those files someday. Luckily, we have everything saved in other places, so losing access isn't an issue. Another benefit is that the increased accessibility of the items can help us improve the collections. For example, I've had a few emails from colleagues who have pointed out that people's names were misspelled. In some cases, this might have been a computer entry error, but in others, the information written down on these photos might have been incorrect. And finally, the digital collections lets us see connections and relationships among the photos that we might not have noticed with physical items. It lets us easily make comparisons and see change over time. I'll show you a few examples of that later on. We can also see some cases where the physical photos have no indication that they're related, but viewing them all together online reveals that they're actually showing the same thing. And I'll show you an example of that with some photos of the 1984 Peace Week event. We start with digitization. I started working at the library in October 2017. The digitization project was already underway at that point, although there was still a lot left to do. We had a big box filled with photos and some other materials from the archives, and were tasked with scanning them all and recording the information that was provided with each item. This could include a title, dates, names, a location, and sometimes other contextual information. Obviously, some items had a lot of information, and others had practically nothing at all. I thought it was a pretty fun and interesting project, being able to see all of these old photos and learning a little bit about them. We continued working on that project for 2 years, and we finally got it finished around the beginning of 2020. Once all the photos were scanned, the next step was to actually create the website where they would be stored. To do that, we decided to use an application called ContentDM. It's a very popular service that many different kinds of institutions use to host and showcase their digital collections. If you start looking, you'll find that a lot of colleges and universities use ContentDM to bring their unique and rare materials to online audiences. It offers a user-friendly interface that's easy to browse and search, and ContentDM websites are automatically indexed by Google. Both of these factors support the kind of discoverability and accessibility we want for our collections. So with all of the photos digitized, I made the proposal for creating the GCU digital collections in February 2020. And it wasn't great timing because the library closed a few weeks later in March because of the pandemic. We got some work done on actually setting up and configuring the website last spring, but we weren't really able to start uploading any files until August. Since then, we've been able to create two collections: the SMJC Library Newsletter Archives and the Historic Photos Collection. That's the larger of the two, and the one I'm going to focus on for the rest of our time. As I said, the GCU Historic Photographs Collection is the larger of the two collections. It consists of several hundred photographs and various text-based resources that document the history of the university. The earliest item we have is a photo of the first graduating class in 1912, but the bulk of the collection dates from the 1950s to the 1980s. Thematically, it's a very diverse collection, and you'll find photos of students, alumni, the Sisters of Mercy, and other faculty, buildings, events, and more. In total, when we finished digitizing everything, we ended up with over 1,000 files. So when I started working on adding items to the website, one question was figuring out where to start. To some extent, I try to prioritize items that contain more information or metadata and ones that are better quality. That doesn't mean that other photos won't eventually make it to the website, just that they might initially take longer to appear. But the more important quality I take into consideration is whether an item is a duplicate or a near duplicate of something else. In some cases, we have dozens of photos taken at the same event, all showing more or less the same thing, and it's not really necessary to upload all of them. In those instances, I would select and upload several photos to represent the series. So now that the collection has been established, one thing we've been able to do with it is the Historic Photo of the Week, which is a section that has appeared in the SMJC newsletter since the end of last October. This usually consists of an interesting photo from the collection, plus a few lines about the content. For example, we had a photo of Sister Mary Peter Coakley working with some chemistry students in 1960, and I was able to include a brief note about who she was. This has been an interesting project for me because a lot of these photos don't include a lot of background information, so I've had the opportunity to learn a lot about the university and some former faculty members and alumni. And the good news is that the historic photo of the week definitely seems to be drawing some attention. I've been keeping an eye on the statistics for the Digital Collections website, and I've noticed that there's always a spike in users on Mondays when the newsletter is published. And of course, that's only counting the number of people who are actually clicking on the link to the Digital Collections website itself. Even more people are seeing these photos in the newsletter. So, for a quick overview of where we're at today, the GCU Digital Collections currently has two collections with a total of 287 items. We've had about 60 unique users since October who visited the website about 128 times, and during those visits there have been well over 1,500 page views. In other words, we have several regular visitors who tend to look at multiple pages each time they visit. Next, I'm going to go over just a few examples of what the Historic Photos collection has to offer. The first photo shows some kind of student lounge in the casino. The photo itself only said that it was behind the stage. There's some distinctive features here, like some pipes in the ceiling, and those things that look like two doorways on the right-hand side. So you could probably go into the casino and figure out where exactly this photo was taken. It's an interesting example of how the way we use spaces on campus has changed over time. There's obviously not a lounge with ping pong tables and chairs behind the stage anymore. On the other hand, the casino still has the Lion's Den and the lounge for veteran students, so while the specific spaces have changed, the building itself still remains some of its earlier functions. The next example also shows how we can use the digital collections to observe change over time. In this case, not with a place, but with a campus organization. The top photo shows the Georgian Court basketball team in 1923. You can take notice of what their uniforms look like, and also notice that the background of the photo is clearly not anywhere on the current campus. Georgian Court moved to its current location in 1924, the year after this photo was taken. The photo on the bottom is from 1956. We can see that the team is much larger, probably reflecting a larger total student population, and that the uniforms have changed a lot in 30 years. And the third photo comes from the GCU athletics page, showing the basketball team in 2018. I think these photos can also highlight how doing some research can add layers to our understanding of what we're looking at. It's not feasible or even necessarily desirable to add historical notes to every photo that gets added to the digital collections. But I did select the 1956 photo for the historic photo of the week last semester, so I got to learn a little bit about the history of women's basketball in colleges and universities. It appeared in the 1890s as the first widespread women's collegiate sport in the country and grew very popular very quickly. However, the game itself looked different than it does today. Until the 1950s, it wasn't really intended to encourage competition. Teams didn't play against other schools, and the game wasn't played on the full court. It was really meant as a way for female students to exercise and bond. However, things started changing in the 1950s. The ban on intercollegiate competition was gradually lifted over the 50s and 60s, and in 1971 colleges and universities adopted the modern rules. So when we look at these older photos, it's worth keeping in mind not only what the players are wearing and what they look like, but also that they were playing a different kind of game with different expectations than what we're used to today. Our third example is a series of images that I think reveal a pretty startling, or at least unexpected, history of one of the buildings on campus. The current Macaulay Heritage Center was originally constructed as St. Mary of the Lake on 2nd Street in Lakewood. The church can be seen in its original location in the first image. By 1924, the priest in charge of St. Mary's had decided to build a newer, larger building and chose to donate the current one to the college. I think the second image is especially striking. It shows how the building was moved in one single piece down the road and onto campus. If you go to the Digital Collections website and look for this image, you'll find that it contains a fairly detailed explanation of why and how the church was moved, and what changes were made to it afterwards. It's one of the few images we have that came with any significant amount of contextual information. And the final picture at the bottom shows the church as it is today, as the Macaulay Heritage Center. The next series of photos exemplifies the way we can use the digital collections to reveal connections between items that wouldn't have been obvious otherwise. These three photos were not physically stored together, and there's nothing on them that explicitly indicates that they're related. However, after uploading them to the Digital Collections website, I noticed that they contained similarities in theme and dates. And I think it's very likely that they all show different aspects of the same event, which was called Peace Week and that took place between April 9th and the 13th in 1984. The first photo was only labeled as 1980's Peace Week, but I haven't seen any indications elsewhere that this was a yearly event, so it was probably taken at this event in 1984. The two students in the picture are encouraging their classmates to fill out postcards advocating for peace, which they intended to send to the president. It's hard to see here, but if you go look at this photo on the website, you can zoom in and make out what the poster says, including their sample messages. It's very neat. The second photo shows Sister Barbara Williams, GCU's president at the time, at the ceremony designating the college as the first Catholic peace site in the United States. The International Peace Site program recognizes communities that have made a commitment to uphold the 5 peace actions that are outlined by the nonprofit organization World Citizen, and you can visit our peace pole with those 5 peace actions across the street from Jeffries Hall. Nothing in this photo explicitly linked it to the Peace Week event. However, the date written on the photo was April 11th, 1984, and between that and the theme, I think it's safe to say that it was probably part of it. Finally, the third image shows a model of a cruise missile pictured here below the Arts and Sciences building, which of course is now Jeffries Hall. This photo was instrumental in revealing the relationships between all three images because this is the one that says what year and what days Peace Week took place. Now, if you look carefully, you can see that the missile has a message reading, "Danger, do not deploy in Europe." I wasn't initially sure what this was referring to exactly. After doing a little research, I learned that the US and the Soviet Union both deployed these kinds of missiles in various places throughout Europe in 1983, which prompted a lot of backlash at home and abroad. This Peace Week event was probably organized partly as a response to those actions. Finally, this last example consists of a 4-page pamphlet for a play put on by the Campus Dramatic Club in 1927. I selected this item to show that although the Historic Photos collection is primarily photos, we do have several text-based objects that may be of interest. The website can't automatically process text from a scanned image, so with these items I tried to input the text into the website in order to make it searchable. That may not always be the case, but you'll find that all of the names in this pamphlet at least are searchable. As we add more items to the website, we may find that some of those people appear in other places. So having these names can allow us to draw new connections between the items in our collections. So what's next? Before we wrap things up, I'd like to share a few of my goals for the digital collections over the next few years. One thing I'd like to see is a greater collaboration with or use of the collections by other departments on campus. This could include alumni relations, the marketing department, and academic departments. I would be especially excited to see students using these materials for their classes. I also want to see the digital collections reaching a wider audience online, not necessarily just people associated with the university. Our website has started showing up in Google searches, so I'm hopeful that this can help us reach new users. Also, with the increased accessibility that digital collections offers, I'm hoping that this will allow us to continue to improve the collections. If you go to the digital collections website and navigate to the About page, you'll find the feedback form that users can use to submit comments, questions, corrections, and other kinds of feedback. This will hopefully allow us to correct any misidentifications and misspellings, and possibly even identify people who we haven't been able to name yet. Finally, I'm looking forward to growing the collections we already have and possibly adding new ones. The Historic Photos collection currently has about 260 items, and by this time next year, I'd like to see that grow to at least 400. As for adding new collections, the likeliest candidate would be a yearbooks collection, although there's a lot we have to consider about how to actually accomplish that in a way that would make it useful to our users. And that really sums up the goal of this entire project, to build something of value that people can and want to use. Thank you.